Hello and welcome to a Python Django live code hangout. Today we'll be working on the companionship care app, and I'll take an issue, kind of maybe a low-hanging fruit issue. So our project is open source on GitHub. We're working with the idea of creating a tool to promote companionship for everybody, but particularly people in need who might have various challenges they face with daily activities like running errands or doing housework. And one of their family or loved ones can create a group to help coordinate activities, going to cafes, running errands, going for walks, calling to chat, basic things, quality of life stuff. And in doing so, not only does the person of the interest benefit, but everybody around them also benefits by gaining more companionship. So we've got, we're pretty far along in the project, relatively speaking, and have a minimum viable prototype that we're currently working with. I do want to experiment with the URL structure. Right now I'm using these UUIDs to uniquely identify person profiles. And in a URL, the UUID is quite long, quite lengthy. And I believe there might be a solution where we can use base64 encoding of sequential IDs that Django has by default enabled on any Django model. So our URL structure could be shorter and still have a little bit of you could say obfuscation about the sequential nature of the identifiers. I should do this early in the project because changing URL structure later in the project could be more disruptive if people are sharing links already. At the same time, I could learn upfront of any trade-offs naturally to this UUID, not only the UUID approach, but the base64 encoding approach. But in any case, it's kind of documented in Django. It's, for example, in the account views, where do we get to base64? For example, where does look for 64? Something. UID, user ID, base64. User ID, base64 might be something specific that I'm misunderstanding. Django. I'm not sure if this will work with an entity ID. So yeah, it could be a breaking change. Yeah, and it's only, to my knowledge, used in this accounts workflow. So it might not be a general purpose. If I do just B64 Django. Or ID base 64. So I probably won't start with this today. Essentially what I need to figure out is what kind of types the Django URL arguments can take. Oops. You know, the Django documentation is very in-depth, but oftentimes it's so lacking in just surface-level explanations where I just need a quick kind of recipe to follow, an understanding, or an overview of like, I have to go really deep dive into slug UUID. So I do have UUID converter, and that's what we're currently using. Path converters, regex. So the UID basics tour seems like a special case. I don't want to write my own converter. So yeah, that's not a low-hanging fruit. Probably I'll leave it alone. Leave it alone on that one. URL parameter, what do they call them? Encoder, converter, path converter, path converter. All right, so not trivial, not good first issue. All right, this redirect. So let's go ahead and take a look at this today. I think without digging into too much in advance, this should be a low-hanging fruit. And essentially, I'm going to go to our custom login view and just take a quick look. It's under accounts. Oops, well, URLs. Let's go ahead there. So we have the login view, which is rendering auth view, login view. So if this allows me to specify the redirect to success redirect field name. Redirect field name. There we go. So the problem is I'm not defining this in code. Next page. Get default writer. If next page, resolve URL next page. Okay, that seems to work. Resolve URL. So let's go ahead and try something. I can pass this in, I believe, as an argument to this method. So I'm not actually I'm not creating the view as a class. I'm just calling this view class as view. That means I can't just set properties on it, but I can pass in properties to the constructor template name. I think it was next page equals. Okay, let's think here for a second. As a string, and it looks like so the next page is used again. Here, resolve URL. So let's see what the resolve URL expects. If I hover, it will give me the little docs. Control tab. Oh wait, there it went. Darn it. When I move my mouse, return a URL appropriate for the arguments passed to a model string, a view name. Yeah, there we go. So our view would be, this might be easier than I thought. Let's go to our URLs. Person list view. Oh wait, that was actually all I needed, just the name of it. Wait, person list. So if this works, when I log in, should be redirected to the person list. Let's put this to one side and this to the other. And I usually spread that out way farther than it needs to be. Local hosts. 8,000. Oh, whoops. So it didn't auto-activate my environment. Oh, gosh. Should be was that the right command already? And I have to copy and paste it because my default browser is not set. But my control key doesn't work half the time. Great, so I log in. Never save that. And here I am at the people page. Wow, one line of code. So that's an example of the framework just accelerating my development. With one line of code, I'm able to change the behavior of a view that I didn't even have to write. It's just all part and parcel of Django. I've had some frustrations in the last couple of days with some nuances where I would consider more of the framework getting in my way, but also my learning about the framework, holes in my knowledge and understanding. But I did encounter where I would still have not resolved. It's a bug probably introduced in this code base, but inconsistent or unexpected behavior with regards to the template locations. That's not a core Django bug. As well as a slight difference of opinion about how the abstract base model should be handled in the default Django password reset flow. It's not supported by default, and I believe there's an inconsistency there that should be ironed out, and whether or not it's a bug is beyond... It's beside the point. It's basically an inconsistency. They're not harmonious, even though has been an attempt to harmonize the abstract base user with the default Django user. Anyway, I opened a bug report about this. It was closed as not being a bug. Yeah, a little bit frustrated by that, and I just don't have much more time to invest in that discussion. Cool. So pluses and minuses, pros and cons. Nothing's perfect. Overall, my experience with Django has been more than positive. From a code base and maturity standpoint, the process surrounding it has been kind of maybe a little more repulsive in terms of not just wanting to invest more time in debating an issue. I'd rather just move on with development and acknowledge limitation. That is indeed documented, but may not be internally consistent, let's say. All right, cool. So that said, let's go ahead and add. Now we're going to create a branch. So person list. So it doesn't matter. All right. So it's literally one line of code, and mostly lint in terms of lines of. And the name, it's the exact same. So very cool. Push this to origin. Create a pull request. This closes an issue. I want to be sure to close this. Closes 77. And I'm tired of typing that. What it does, I've typed in the title, and in the commit message, I believe that's sufficient for tracking purposes. Rebase and merge this pull request. I can wait for the checks to run. One of them's quite long. The analyze Python step takes a while. Let's give it just a moment to try to get the green light. Still yellow. Very cool. So let's take a look at what other issues we have. error page templates is kind of a low-hanging fruit. I was hoping to put some of these out there that are good first issues for people to pick up. Let me see if there's something more complicated. Test coverage report. Well, I could even just experiment with test coverage reporting and see where we're at. I don't know if I'll get it in a continuous integration pipeline, which would be essentially telling code coverage. Well, it would be automatically generating test coverage and submitting the results to code climate on commit. Essentially, GitHub would run a job, and it's not clear to me how to do that. Password reset feature is done. Still yellow. I don't think this is possible. This could be semi-low hanging. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to add the D operation to the CRU. And we're not running, we're not creating an API necessarily, although if we do look at creating a mobile app, we'll definitely want to look at an API at that point. But for now, we have a monolithic app, and defining just everything renders on the server. Very straightforward view code, HTML, CSS. So the API layer and then the app layer would be unnecessary complexity for the not only the stage of development of this project, but even the type of project. This is sort of a CRUD application, rendering pages, and it's not necessarily a really dynamic or interactive or 60 frames per second type of experience we're looking for. So honestly, the single page app layer, even if you did server-side rendering as the ecosystem seems to be revolving towards, it just doesn't, it would hamper the development more than help it. Hey, cool, we got green light on this pull request, rebase and merge. And confirm that. Yeah. So we'll check out main again. Reload, close these tabs. Nice. All right, so we got a project running. Ability to delete scheduled activities. So essentially, I've got an activity here, and I'm like, maybe I'm thinking, oops, I didn't need to schedule that. I want to delete it. Now the problem here is we're running out of space. And this is exactly why we don't have like a calendar interface, because a calendar not only is like a grid and it's kind of hard to make those mobile responsive, but our interface is better oriented as a list of kind of cards that have actions like adding and removing or joining, or marking as complete, or editing the details. Also, I think that was it. I need to hide this though when it's not displayed. Care group photo, hide care group photo when not provided. Yeah, that's low hanging fruit. Let me just remind myself of that. and empty. More or less, I don't know the correct name for that. Let's just take a picture though. It's not even an empty box, but basically the alt text. So that's pretty good. Well, check this out. This is a cool tool. You can annotate stuff with spectacle. I'm going to select, ooh, it's even getting more tools. Let's double check here. Oh, that's bright. Arrow, red arrow. Boop. Oh, yeah. Let's see. I don't need to make it bigger than necessary. Annotation done. Copy to clipboard. Close that one. Pop that there. Take one more screenshot. It's in 2 places. Print screen. Take a new screenshot. Here's my whole screen for you. I'll consider the generic placeholder approach, but I'm not sure what would be ideal. It's basic enhancement, conversion issue, help on it. Cool. Yeah. Just try to remember those to get them in our backlog right away. Remember to do that. So delete scheduled activities. So this one is on the surface is simple, relatively speaking, because the framework lets us delete entities and gives us some actually URL paths and views that'll do that with very few lines of code properly. I just need essentially a link to click and a view. The problem is though, where am I going to put it? And I think the convention here is a drop-down menu with an ellipsis right here. So I've got multiple actions that want to fill this space. I'll try that approach. I haven't thought about this too deeply, but luckily I've used enough user interfaces that I can kind of my intuition is relatively strong based on that experience, and that experience is based on the design thinking of many people. So in other words, I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of giants by virtue of just having used online software and following kind of conventions, like the ellipsis and the hidden element is not only is it's a convention, but also it has trade-offs. And one of the benefits is that it can hide elements that aren't commonly or immediately needed, but then the trade-off is that when you need those elements, they might be hard to find, and not everybody also is familiar with the convention of clicking an ellipsis. So yeah, definitely trade-offs, but I don't want this to turn into an airline cockpit, like so many things already. And then important information like the fact that this appointment doesn't have anybody, starts to get hidden in a way, hidden in plain sight. Cool. So yeah, let's see what we can do here. So and also when choosing features for software, that should go into it, and also the feature to work on now at any given point. It's important to think of the magnitude of effect this feature will have, the number of people it benefit, the amount they'll be benefited or the severity of the difficulty they're facing because it doesn't exist. I think this is sort of a low magnitude bug. I'm not sure how often this would be needed. But people are humans are error prone. We make mistakes. Or things get canceled. Life is unpredictable. So there's going to be times when people need to delete that. So might as well try to put that in now. That's my rationale for taking this task at this point. So I like to start with the outside in. I like to try an experiment in the user interface and then make it work throughout the code base. So start with the user interface. It would be bootstrap 5 dropdown button. Essentially is a button. Drop downs, but I think you can define drop downs on anything. Boing. Or I was even thinking just an ellipsis, but maybe the drop down is more communicative. Actions, like actions edit, actions delete. Or can you just do a drop down without? These are actions. They're also square buttons. I'm using round buttons. So there's a bunch of questions I have if this is going to work. So first, if I do, it's a button group. You have this word. Which appears here, I think. Then you have a button group. I think I'll learn from this some lessons that I can take into another task I'm working on with localizations. So let's find this code. Oops, we're in a project. People, templates. Right, I had to do this login register thing because the invitation flow. I believe this is at the level of person activity. This naturally leads to a component-oriented design, although we're not literally using any kind of component system, aside from the fact that HTML allows for what you would call composition. And one problem I've encountered here is the layout. I'm going to break the layout. All right, so essentially we're here, and we're going to add a button group. I wish it would be context sensitive and use proper indentation from the point of insertion. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong there. There's got to be a way. So let's see. So that worked. Around its circle. And what if I just don't have any text there? I put around a circle here. See my. Whoops. Actually, that's a smaller one. That actually is not so bad, and it worked. It was easier than I thought. And we'll do. It should spill out probably to the left if I can do that. So drop down start, sizing, dark, directions, drop up, drop right, drop left. Oh, yeah, that's basically. Well, it's like placements. I don't want alignment. Drop down menu, start, drop down menu. It doesn't need to be responsive. And they're using start and end instead of the older semantics, I forget. Left and right. It's not about left or right. It's about start or end. Huh. So. Yeah. All right. So I was confused by that, but anyway. Oh, right. Because it's putting it's aligning the end of this menu with the button. Cool. All right. Now we don't need a green. We can do button. Well, it doesn't need to be really strong as long as it stands out. Yeah, even that's outline. It's looking pretty good, actually. So the blue is like a one-off action you can perform immediately. Yeah. So we don't need a text, do we? It's just help text, probably. I don't think it's a title. Just testing out real quick. Ooh, and since so that works. And it's gone to an oval now. This is chunky, but it's relating to how I'm doing my layout. I think it's collapsing it. For non-breaking space in there, so I need the ampersand. Where's that ampersand? There's a shift. Comma. Oh, dang it. I don't need to have these be circles, but it's kind of the analogies that you touch it with your finger. Boop, boop, boop. Our fingers are kind of circular to encourage people to use it on mobile devices. And also kind of foreshadow that we might be creating a mobile app here. Well, let's see. No, there's no icon there. Where's it getting this? Where is it getting this icon from? Where is that coming from? It's right there, isn't it? No, that's not going to work. Okay. Shoot. Well, what if I do this? It looks bad. Ah, it's a bummer. Oh, you know what? That might be sufficient, and I can put the own icon in there. I think all it needs is this bootstrap toggle to activate the JavaScript. Let's find out. Yeah, then I can put an icon. That should give me a find a code for that. Let's just say arrow or down or ellipsis. 3 dots. Here we go. But put the ellipsis in there. So this comes here, this comes there. There we go. Does it work? Yes. Muta. What's more? So this needs to be translated. Just real quick. Translate. Well, this can be double quoted and this can be single quoted. But for consistency, I'll do double quotes, single quote, double quote. Actions is the right word. Action, action, action. So, essentially each of these has all right, so I got a modal toggle. It's a button. Another wrench in the works. We're making progress though. So I need a toggle modal. A drop-down menu, or more generically, render a button in a drop-down menu. Some menu items here. Drop-down item. Just put a button in there. Very cool. And I'm glad that just works. That's another thing about having a framework that's internally consistent. You can, continually evolving there, ironing out the difficulties. You can do, and through composition, you can do kind of things that maybe weren't anticipated at first, but they just work. Like putting a button inside of a drop-down menu. And in this case, it's documented even. Whoops. Bring everything in 2, 3. And the class is a little different. All it needs to be is a drop-down item. Everything else should be good. And this week we'll have some, well, instead of a title, we'll just put the text, right? I don't know if we need a title and the text. It looks good, and we got the little icon there. And it works. Brilliant. All right. This is another thing about using Bootstrap is, maybe boring as it sounds, or it seems like there's newer and better things. Bootstrap just uses HTML and CSS and JavaScript, right? You don't need another framework, a component-oriented framework, a JavaScript front-end framework, or anything just to use it and drop it into a page. And generally speaking, when you have a component library like this, whether or not you're using a front-end framework or all that aside, you don't have to invent things like a modal dialog or responsive layout, which are incredibly nuanced. You don't have to, like the shaded background and the alignment and the animation. There's a lot of things that go into those that have been evolved and improved over many years in the case of Bootstrap. And I've witnessed firsthand developers in a corporate environment, so to speak, workplace, that are struggling with low-level details like implementing modal dialogues and other things that are otherwise solved by frameworks like Django, Bootstrap, things like that. So use there's the phrase "not invented here" syndrome, where you don't want to use the things that you haven't created yourself or haven't been built in-house. Please avoid that. Save yourself some time and energy and focus your attention and efforts on things that are unique to your business need. I'll say that again. I'm sure in the future on this stream I've said it in the past, but just a reminder of my philosophy here. So there we go. We've got this working in only a few lines of code and only a few minutes, relatively speaking. And we'll then be able to move on to the feature of today being able to delete these activities, which I believe will also be accelerated by the framework choices that I've used in this project. All right, whoops, wrong button. So I'm going to commit this. I'm in a branch. Let's just say move. Basically that. Action instruction. There we go. Everything's localizable, labeled. Even the buttons inside here are labeled for accessibility. Cool. Now we're gonna add another button, and regardless of, it's not gonna toggle. So let's just go ahead and add the button. Like I said, outside in. What's more common? Edit's probably more common, and then delete. And the edit modal might be place to put a delete button, or I could save the user a click and just put delete here, which will then need a confirmation, and you'll have to click delete a second time. Now, if I do the edit activity here and put a delete button there, I'll still need to confirm it. Any destructive action should have confirmation, which is why I haven't put a delete in here yet, because we want to avoid destructive actions. But as mentioned at the beginning of this session, people make mistakes, plans get canceled, so we'll need to clean up sometimes. And marking something as done would work and possibly clear it out of your vision, but it's not an appropriate action. It's not really done, it didn't happen, so we want to kind of be able to give people the right semantic and the right tool. So with all that said, I'm not going to add the delete button here, because in either case I'll want to confirm it. I'll add a delete button here with a confirmation modal that will in turn call the correct view endpoint. So first let's put the button in here and delete. And this will be lowercase d. And luckily with these modals I have copy and paste code. Let's find a cool icon for this. X. It's common or trash. Let's see what they're looking for. Delete or remove. and with these icons, you need to think, it'll have words next to it. What's the convention people will recognize? Pencil for edit. I guess the trash is pretty common. X is a good one. X circle. It's a little less busy. Oh, wait, look at this calendar. X, yeah, remove it from the calendar. Do people have wall calendars or desk calendars like that anymore? I don't know. What's the difference here? I guess that's a kind of a, what's more common? Well, I don't want to get too stuck about it, but it's kind of more semantic. Alright. And we don't have the modal yet, so we'll create that. Looks good. So let's go ahead and create the modal. And at this point, what I can point out real quick is this file is getting pretty long. I've got activity participant modal, edit activity modal, and then the main activity card. All of this is necessary, and all this conditional logic just to render the card. It might be time to split these modals out into their own templates real quick. But first, let me just add the modal, and then I'll split it out. So the commit is kind of self-contained that way. Okay, in the context here, wow. Yeah, this is kind of bloating the page. I realize, I remember this now. For each activity that's displayed on the page, we're also rendering in the document modals times 3. So at some point I'm going to want to optimize this and have just a single, basically 3 modals on the page. And what I'm getting at is this person profile page will have a number of activities. There could be 10 here, let's say. And for each activity, there's rendered also in the DOM 3 modals. So you have 10 activities, that's 30 modals. It's a lot of DOM stuff. A lot of content that's going to go over the wire. Now I'm going to put pagination in. But if so in order to reduce the amount of content, these modals can be abstracted to a generic one that takes, an activity ID, for example. Alright, so this is it's an acknowledged limitation. I haven't documented this, but what we're looking at is this action needs to open up. Oh, Control F. Let's just see real quick. Well, so if I hit refresh and delete it, oh. Yeah, okay, so this is just down here, copy, paste it. Essentially, I'm going to delete all this or comment it out for a moment. It should be a capital D. Control or Shift. Yeah. Select. Oh no. A lot of D's. Something like that. Just really basic. I'm not gonna have any button there. So I'm gonna refresh. Delete activity. Are you sure you want to delete this activity? Very cool. All right, I'm gonna take a quick break. Actually, I don't have much time. Just go a really quick break, and then we'll come to a stopping point here after I get the button. And I think the next session, I will work on the form and view, something like that. I've got it. It's a little bit more detailed right now. Working outside in, I've got most of the UI changes complete, and at that point, I can start working from the inside out and kind of meet midway. All right, so let me just take a quick break. I'll be right back. Yes, so we will just mock the button here and add the form later. In order to display the button. I'll just comment out the form stuff. This is interesting. That's commented out. Why? Whoops. That's why you have to use the Django comment thing. Interesting. No problem. Something about the template language. You can't just use the regular template comments in certain cases where you're doing such actions as probably running template helpers and other variable interpolation into the template. So you just gotta use regular comments. Lesson learned. Learning new things every day, but that should work. So we got this. Delete activity shows a thing, and that should basically, let's wrap this up. P and localize it. Nice, looking good. And this should be danger. And maybe we'll have a nice icon in there as well. Icons throughout. So we can come over here real quick. Put it before the text and before the heading. And this is interesting that we're using H5 here. I think this is, we could just copy and paste it from the documentation, but since this doesn't really have a context about where it is in the document hierarchy, the heading hierarchy, it shouldn't be using a heading. If we want it to display with a certain size, then I can say like H5 here as an example, but not like just using the header level to control the font size. That should be done in the styles, not the semantic layer. Very cool. Is it too many icons? The button probably doesn't need the icon. How about that? A little bit less. Edit activity. And I can, for consistency, just kind of clean up this edit activity more a little bit. But let's commit this. Changes are add initial delete activity confirmation model. Publish this branch. Create a pull request. With consistency and whether use these generic modal for all activities. May require JS. I think you might be able to do it semantically through the data layer of the modal. create this as a draft. Just kind of fleshing out my thoughts here. So making a little bit of progress today. So let's do a quick review. And I think I can just use this pull request. It's not very many lines of code, so I don't have to switch back and forth to the IDE. I can just say what we're working on. Look at the implementation and take a quick look at the code. All right, ready? Hello and welcome to a recap of today's Python Django live code hangout. Today we're working on the companionship care app, or open source on GitHub. We started on issue number 44, the ability to delete scheduled activities. When you have a care profile, a person's profile who you want to coordinate companions to do various activities with that person, sometimes the activities will get canceled, or you might make a mistake when entering something that editing the activity won't fix. For various reasons, you may just want to delete an activity. As it stands, all you can do with activities is edit them and mark them done. But today we worked on a new feature, we're halfway through, to allow you to delete an activity with confirmation. So here's the code without further ado. I've started on the outside and we're working our way in. So we're working just through the user interface at this point. In the following session, I'll start with the backend logic. It's essentially a view that will allow us to delete the activity. But for now, I wanted to focus on just reorganizing the user interface, adding this button with the ellipsis, and you can hover over it and see what it's for, and it drops down and gives you sub links or sub actions. So we're using Bootstrap, and fortunately Bootstrap makes this work very straightforward. On the activity card, each activity is displayed in its own card. So add another activity. We have two activity cards with their corresponding action buttons. You create a button group and a button that will drop down. We have a 3 dots, also known as an ellipsis, icon displaying here. And essentially the button takes some Bootstrap styles, including we want a round button to kind of indicate that this can be touched with your finger. The idea here is that this can be useful on a mobile application, a mobile phone or device, without having to actually create a mobile application. So running in the browser on a mobile device, and it'll toggle a drop down and give it a title for usability. The drop down, I think, just comes from the same button group. By being in a button group, you don't have to have any other semantics there saying what drop down to toggle. This is Bootstrap 5, so I think they've worked to create a more general purpose approach to some of these frameworks, just using the document to describe itself rather than having to explicitly pass in other metadata. So by combining these in a common parent, using a drop-down with a drop-down menu sibling, you're able to achieve this effect. I'm using the drop-down menu end here so that the end of the menu is aligned with the button text. By default, it was opening out to the right, and that was overlapping this companions. And on smaller screens, it might even have some issues with the edge of the screen here. So dropping out to the left seemed more natural. Then inside that, unordered list, you create list items. And actually, I just realized I have an error here that's surprisingly working. I think each of these buttons should be in their own list item as a drop-down item, but that's interesting that works. I'll try to fix that off stream. This button previously was the edit action that took this space originally. I've moved it into the button group, so nothing really has changed here. This toggles a modal dialog, and all we're doing is following the same pattern here. You click the button, it's got a title. When you hover over that with your mouse, or a screen reader might pick up that title. It's a drop-down item, so it renders correctly in that drop-down menu. It toggles a modal with the target delete activity. It's a confirmation modal for the activity ID. It's got an icon and some help text. Toggles this modal. There's a number of ways that this code can be improved overall. One of the most significant that I'm using in this project is each of these cards is rendering basically markup for 3 modals. So you got 3, 6, 9, 12. Depending on how many modals, activity cards we're displaying here, that could add to a lot of markup and a slow page load. So I might move those into a more generic approach where we pass in the activity ID as maybe a property to the modal, and hopefully can pass that into the form, or somehow use JavaScript to invoke the modal with the variables. I'm not sure if that's within the scope of this pull request. And I do have the idea to add pagination here, so the issue might be kind of negligible, although still wasteful in terms of bandwidth usage. But I could say only render 5, only render 10, and then we're looking at 30 extra, you could say, UI components with all the markup. Here's the modal dialog. So it's, basically this times the number of cards displayed. The modal is going to fade in. It's got the ID mentioned before. This is all just straight out of the documentation. And since we have to render a modal for each item, it needs to be uniquely keyed for both opening it and labeling the elements in there. This is straight up bootstrap markup here. Modal dialog, modal content, modal header. I'm using a paragraph for the modal header because I don't know the heading level. The documentation actually uses the heading, like a heading tag, to style the text, to control the font style, font size specifically. I moved that over into a class, modal title header level 5. I could probably make it more generic and just say font medium, something like that. It's got the ID so that Aria knows how to label it, translation strings, an icon, and a button to dismiss and close the dialog. Right now it has some translated text prompting the person to make sure that they want to perform this action, and I've commented out the form that will eventually submit the essentially post to the delete endpoint, which doesn't exist, or the delete view. But I did leave the button in just, again, for mocking out the user experience. It doesn't have any action right now, but the delete and the close button will, and we got icons. So that's, in a nutshell, the progress we've made so far, adding Bootstrap button group with a drop-down, multiple actions, and multiple modal dialogues. That way we don't have the user interface getting too cluttered. We're able to put some of the less frequently used actions in a less prominent interface element, leaving room for the important information, important actions to take more prominence in the user's field of view. So this has been a Python and Django live code hangout. Thanks for your time and stopping by, and I hope you're doing well.